Hello!
We're Zach and Annie, a Scotsman and American who met while working as camp counselors.
Then we fell in love, started a family,
And now, after 15 years of living across the US, we recently uprooted our entire lives to move from California to Bonnie, Scotland.
Hi everyone, welcome back.
Today we're going grocery shopping. And we know these days there's 100 variations of every single thing in the grocery store. But don't worry, Annie's done all the maths for you. She's compared dollars to pounds and all the different weight categories and volume categories there are.
Yes.
So buckle in.
And the other thing we wanted to make sure that we mentioned is that we're choosing two stores. We're doing Tesco in Scotland, specifically the East Lothian area, versus Safeway in Northern California. And they were both stores that are outside of big cities in a small town. And we feel like the food's pretty similar. So if we used a store brand product in Tesco, then we used the same type of store brand product in Safeway. So we just wanted to make it as fair as possible, and let's get into that a little bit more.
All right. But before we go into the maths lesson, we did want to highlight some pretty big differences that we noticed between the food shops here and the food shops in the US.
I think we should start with how things are laid out. Well, first off, before even that, the store sizes are just quite different.
Everything's bigger in the US.
You have more people and you have more space, so of course stores are generally larger, and we notice that even down to aisle sizes.
Yes.
And then from that point, the way that everything's put in the grocery store, laid out, is that the frozen foods and the refrigerated sections in the US are typically on the perimeter of the stores.
Whereas in the UK, a lot of those refrigerated sections or frozen sections are down the aisles, kind of in the middle of the store, which was a slight difference for us.
And talking about refrigerated, eggs.
Yes.
Eggs are not refrigerated in the UK, but they are in the US.
Something Annie thought was crazy for when we first met. Like, why are your eggs not in the fridge? Like, why are yours in the fridge? So
Exactly. And then that brings us to the self-scanners at Tesco.
Annie loves this thing.
My favorite thing ever invented. You do not have those in Safeway in California. And I don't know if you have them in grocery stores in the US really
Yeah, it'd be
much at
interesting
all.
to see where else it is. So let us know, because it came out a while back, then disappeared. Now it's back, and we love it. So
And finally, the measurements are different. So in the US, you usually have pounds and gallons and ounces, whereas in the UK, you're working with grams and liters.
pints. We got a whole smorgasbord of measurements.
Slightly different, which made doing the math so much fun for me. I just love that part. Conversion.
The weird thing is she does like math problems. So if you go on Google, a quick 30-second search will show you that UK grocery prices are about 30 to 33% lower than US prices. So we're going to give them up-to-date numbers. It's November 2024. We did these prices yesterday, so it's as fresh as we can get them to you. And let's see how things stack up.
So it's quite rainy today, but we decided to take a walk into town, go to Tesco, and we're going to get some groceries. So the first item on our shopping list was strawberries. And as you can see here, the UK's price for strawberries for 227 grams was £2.30. And the US equivalent was £1.93. So the US slightly won out here with a price 16% cheaper than that in the UK.
So this brings us to grapes. In the UK, it's £1.80 for 500 grams, and the equivalent in the US is £2.99. So for grapes, the UK is 40% cheaper.
For Pink Lady apples, in the UK, they are £4.20 per kilogram, and in the US, the equivalent is £4.25. And so this one, the UK wins with a price that's 1% cheaper. Next up, we have bananas. In the UK, bananas cost about 90 pence per kilogram, and in the US, they are £1.53 per kilogram, making the UK come in 41% cheaper.
So for romaine lettuce in the UK, you're looking at 57.5 pence each, and in the US, that's going to be £1.03 each, which means the UK is 44% cheaper.
Now we have an iceberg lettuce head. In the UK, they are 89 pence each, and in the US, they're about £2, 32 pence each. So the UK's price is 62% cheaper. You can pick yourself up an avocado for 75 pence in the UK, whereas in the US, it's going to be about £1, 56 pence. So that brings us to the UK of having an avocado priced 52% cheaper. As far as onions go, you can pick one up for about 33 pence each. And in the US, it's going to be about £1, 15 pence each. So the UK's price is 71% cheaper.
So for 220 grams of green beans in the UK, you're looking at 85 pence. And in the US, it's going to be £1 and 12 pence, making the UK 24% cheaper.
Next up, we have zucchini, otherwise known as courgettes. And in the UK, you can get a kilogram of courgette for £2, 58 pence, whereas in the US, it's going to run you £5, 9 pence. So the UK is 49% cheaper here.
Okay, and a strong staple for any Scottish diet, the mighty potato. It's going to be 75 pence per kilogram in the UK and £2 and 99 pence per kilogram in the US, which means the UK is 75% cheaper.
This was a close one, baby carrots. In the US, they're £1, 9 pence for 320 grams. And for that same amount in the UK, you have £1, 10 pence. So this is less than 1% cheaper in the US.
So for bell peppers in the UK, you're looking at 55 pence each. And in the US, it's going to be £1 and 55 pence each, making the UK 65% cheaper.
So this one actually surprised me. Milk in the US is £1, 9 pence for 1.136 liters, and the equivalent in the UK is £1, 20 pence. So the US actually had the cheaper price by 9%.
Okay, on to some more dairy here, and we're looking at butter. In the UK, for 200 grams, it's going to be £2 and 15 pence, and in the US, it's going to be £2 and 4 pence, making the US 5% cheaper.
With mild cheddar cheese slices, the UK was £2, 65 pence for 250 grams, and the US for the same amount was £3, 82 pence. So in this case, the UK was 31% cheaper.
Okay, so for grated cheese in the UK, 250 grams is going to be £2 and 55 pence, and in the US, that's going to be £3 and 65 pence, making the UK 30% cheaper.
Looking at your vanilla yogurt, we have a price of £1, 93 pence per 450 grams in the US, and then in the UK, the same was £2, 25 pence. So this time, the US came in 14% cheaper.
Okay, onto some sliced ham here. In the UK, for 120 grams, you're looking at £3 and 25 pence. In the US, that's going to be £1 and 23 pence, making the US 62% cheaper.
With minced meat or ground beef, what we call it in the US, you're going to pay £3, 40 pence for 500 grams in the UK. And then in the US, the same will cost you £6, 84 pence. The UK is 50% cheaper here.
Now this is a surprising one because we thought chicken in the US was expensive, but in the UK, 950 grams is going to cost you £6 and 25 pence. And in the US, that's going to be £4 and 86 pence, making the US 22% cheaper.
This brings us to one of my favorite, bacon. And although we don't have the exact same bacon in both countries, we're still going to compare the different variants because everyone loves bacon and I want to be able to see how much we're paying. So for your UK standard bacon, you're paying £1, 89 pence per 300 grams. And in the US, when you think of our bacon, it's £5, 47 pence per 300 grams. So this one, the UK has a price that's 65% cheaper.
Salmon is something our kids love to eat, so this was a nice one. In the UK, 520 grams is £9.70, and in the US, it's going to be £10 and 68 pence, making the UK 9% cheaper. Okay, on to garlic bread. In the UK, 205 grams will be £1, and in the US, it's going to be £2 and 51 pence, making the UK 60% cheaper.
Now, if you have kids, you're likely buying chicken nuggets. And there's a big difference with this one. In the UK, you can buy chicken nuggets for £5, 25 pence per 697 grams, whereas in the US, that's going to run you £11, 22 pence. making the price in the UK 53% cheaper. So I wanted to do some names that were both in the US and the UK, and Tropicana was one of those brands that I could find. So with orange juice, you are paying £3.25 per 1.5 litres in the UK, whereas that same brand in the US is going to run you £3.82. So the UK's price for Tropicana is 15% cheaper.
With rice in the UK, you're looking at £1.18 per kilogram, and in the US, that's going to be £2.13, making the UK 45% cheaper.
In a previous video, we talked about more artisan type breads or sourdough, but here's your standard white bread. And in the UK, you're going to be paying 74 pence per 800 grams, whereas in the US, for that same equivalent, you'll be paying £3.46. So bread in the UK is 79% cheaper.
Okay, so here's some similar crisps as well. In the UK, 100 grams is going to be £1.33, and in the US, that's going to be £2.04, making the UK 35% cheaper. Here's a nice direct comparison for Frosties. In the UK, it's 43 pence per 100 grams, and in the US, that's 96 pence per 100 grams, making the UK 55% cheaper.
This is another one that was quite surprising to me. I didn't think spaghetti could be too expensive, but apparently it is. In the UK, it cost £1.29 per kilogram, where in the US, it's £3.89 per kilogram. So the UK's price is 76% cheaper.
Okay, so for a dozen eggs in the UK, it's going to cost you £3.15, and in the US, that's going to cost £4.63, making the UK 32% cheaper.
This one's a bit of a killer. In the UK, you can get a raspberry jam for 89 pence per 454 grams, whereas in the US, that same amount is going to be £3.78. And so the UK's price is 76% cheaper.
Okay, so for sugar, in the UK, it's going to be £2.15 for 2 kilograms. In the US, it's going to be £4.66 for 2 kilograms, making the UK 54% cheaper. Okay, so for flour in the UK, 1.5 kilograms will cost you 79 pence. And in the US, that's going to be £2.44, making the UK 68% cheaper.
Tea in the UK is cheaper. You can get a box of 40 for £2.90 in the UK, whereas in the US, it's going to run you £3.70. And so the overall price is 22% cheaper in the UK. Next up, we have my favorite, coffee. And in the US, it's going to be £4.11 for about 200 grams. And in the UK, that same amount is going to be £2.25. So the price in the UK is 45% cheaper. This one we absolutely hated buying in the US because every single time we felt like we were getting absolutely robbed. And you can see here, we were. So for 750 grams of granola in the UK, it's going to run you £3.60, and that same amount in the US will be £6.82. So it's 47% cheaper in the UK. Now here's a fun one. I didn't think you'd have this brand over here, but this barbecue sauce we actually really love in our house. And in the US, the Sweet Baby Ray's is £2.71 per bottle. And in the UK, that same one is £3.70. And so it's 27% cheaper in the United States.
All right, well, this is actually the third time I've been to Tesco today, but this was for the big shop. A lot of stuff we normally get. And yeah, now we have got to battle the weather to get home, but...
Maybe we'll do a Costco remix as well.
I love Costco, so...
Because we didn't get some of the meats because that's what we typically do at Costco, but we'll do another video in the future with all that.
Yeah. So in the end, what's the verdict? Taking all those products into consideration and hours of maths by Annie, the verdict is that the UK is 35% cheaper overall than the US.
So if you enjoyed any of this today or learned something new, please give us a thumbs up or subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.